Welcome to Novum Tempus, your gateway to the stories shaping our world. Today, we're diving into a topic that's as timely as it is transformative: the shifting sands of global alliances. The United States and Canada share more than just a border. They share a history, values, and an economic bond that has been a model for the world. For decades, the two countries have been each other's largest trading partners. Goods have flowed freely, supporting millions of jobs on both sides of the border. But this once unshakable partnership has been shaken by trade tariffs. The seeds of discord were sown during the Trump administration with the America First agenda. These policies included tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from Canada, justified by national security. The reality? A blow to Canadian industries and a chill in relations. Canada, long accustomed to being America's steadfast ally, felt betrayed. Trust, once a bedrock of the relationship, began to erode. The question on everyone's mind: could this relationship be salvaged? The impact was felt not just in boardrooms and on factory floors, but in the very fabric of the US-Canada relationship. The steel and aluminum tariffs imposed by the Trump administration hit Canada hard. These industries, vital to the Canadian economy, were suddenly facing a 25% and 10% tariff, respectively. Canadian businesses were left reeling, orders were cancelled, and jobs were lost. The impact was particularly acute in places like Hamilton, Ontario, a city with a long and proud history of steel production. Factories that had been humming for generations fell silent. Workers who had spent their lives honing their craft were suddenly out of work. The tariffs had a ripple effect, impacting not just the steel and aluminum industries themselves, but also the countless businesses that relied on them. The Canadian government responded with retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods. These tariffs, while aimed at inflicting economic pain on the U.S., were also a way for Canada to show that it would not be bullied. The trade war, while limited in scope, had a significant impact on the economies of both countries. The tariffs on steel and aluminum were eventually lifted, but the damage was done. Canada, once content to rely on its southern neighbor, began to look for other options. The tariff dispute with the U.S. was a wake-up call for Canada. It forced the country to confront a difficult reality. It could no longer take its relationship with the U.S. for granted. Canada needed to diversify its trading partners and reduce its reliance on the American market, and so began a pivot eastward, towards the European Union. The EU, with its large single market and commitment to free trade, represented an attractive alternative to the U.S. Canada already had a trade agreement with the EU, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, or CETA. But the tariff dispute with the US gave new urgency to deepening this relationship. The EU, for its part, welcomed Canada's attention, eager to strengthen its ties with like-minded countries. Canada, long a staunch ally of the US, was signaling that it was prepared to chart its own course in the world. CETA, a bridge across the Atlantic. At the heart of Canada's pivot towards the EU is CETA, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement. CETA is a free trade agreement that came into effect in 2017. It eliminates tariffs on most goods traded between Canada and the EU. It also opens up markets for services and makes it easier for businesses to invest in each other's economies. CETA is more than just a trade agreement. It's a symbol of the growing partnership between Canada and the EU. It's a sign that both sides are committed to free trade and a rules-based international order. The tariff dispute with the US gave CETA new importance, showing it was more than just a piece of paper. It was a lifeline for Canadian businesses looking for new markets, and it was a sign that the EU was a reliable partner that Canada could count on. CETA is not without its critics, but for the most part, it has been welcomed by businesses and governments on both sides of the Atlantic. The agreement underscores the importance of global partnerships in an era of growing protectionism. Shifting sands: geopolitical implications of a Canadian pivot. Canada's pivot towards the EU has significant geopolitical implications. For decades, Canada has been a staunch ally of the US, cooperating closely on everything from defense to trade. But the tariff dispute with the US has strained this relationship. And Canada's growing ties with the EU suggest that it is prepared to chart a more independent course in the world. This is a major shift in the geopolitical landscape. The US has long taken Canada's support for granted, but Canada's pivot towards the EU shows that this support can no longer be assumed. The US risks losing a key ally at a time when it is facing growing challenges from China and Russia. The EU, for its part, is eager to welcome Canada into the fold, seeing it as a like-minded country that shares its values of multilateralism and free trade. The EU is also keen to strengthen its ties with Canada as a way to counterbalance the growing power of the US. Canada's pivot towards the EU is still in its early stages, but one thing is clear: the geopolitical landscape is shifting. The US can no longer take Canada's support for granted. Voices from the front lines, personal stories of trade turmoil. The trade tensions between the US and Canada have had a very real impact on people's lives. In Canada, businesses have been forced to close, workers have lost their jobs, and families have struggled to make ends meet. In the US, consumers have faced higher prices, and businesses have had to contend with supply chain disruptions. Take, for example, the story of Jean-Pierre, a steel worker from Hamilton, Ontario. Jean-Pierre had worked at the same steel mill for over 20 years. He was proud of his job and the role he played in building his community. But then the tariffs hit, and the mill was forced to lay off workers, including Jean-Pierre. He spent months looking for a new job, but there was nothing to be found. Jean-Pierre eventually had to sell his house and move in with his brother. Or consider the story of Sarah, a single mother from Maine who works at a paper mill. The mill relies on Canadian lumber to make its products, and when the US imposed tariffs on Canadian lumber, the cost of lumber skyrocketed, forcing the mill to raise its prices and cut Sarah's hours. American farmers have also been hit hard. John, a soybean farmer from Iowa, saw his exports plummet due to retaliatory tariffs from Canada. With no buyers for his crops, John struggled to keep his farm afloat and provide for his family. Then there's Maria, a small business owner in Michigan, who relied on Canadian suppliers for her boutique. When the tariffs increased, her costs soared, and she had to let go of employees and reduce her inventory. The price of discord, US risks, and the future of global alliances. The trade tensions between the US and Canada are a cautionary tale. They show how quickly a close relationship can be damaged by protectionist policies. And they highlight the importance of global alliances in an increasingly interconnected world. The US has paid a price for its trade war with Canada. The tariffs have damaged the US economy, costing American jobs and raising prices for consumers. They have also strained the US's relationship with one of its closest allies. The trade war has also damaged the US's reputation as a reliable trading partner. This could make it more difficult for the US to negotiate trade agreements with other countries in the future. The trade tensions between the US and Canada are a reminder that global alliances matter. These alliances are built on trust, shared values, and a commitment to cooperation. The US should be working to strengthen its alliances and promote free trade around the world. Thank you for watching. At Novum Tempus, we believe in exploring the stories that shape our world, no matter how complex or controversial. So, what do you think? Could this mark a significant shift in global alliances? Let us know in the comments below.